Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is uh, actually September 15th, Sunday afternoon for me as I record this, but this will be posted as of midnight, ready for Monday, September 16th, week four, quarter of the way through our course, just a few weeks till we meet in Dallas. And this week, I wanted to go over another area of policy that affects many of you as information systems and affects everyone as a citizen. But it affects many of you as information systems professionals working in this area. Overview for today's lecture: we're going to talk about privacy and somewhat about anonymity or maybe non-attribution. Um, there's a lot of research into that area, a lot of writing, and information systems policy. Now, I want to make sure we are differentiating between public policy, which are the laws that govern corporations and individual citizens, versus corporate policy. So sometimes when we just say the word policy, it can be a little confusing. Um, Sometimes it's more accurate to say legislation or laws when we talk about public policy. But I want to make sure that we're all on the same sheet of music, using the same terminology. So we'll talk about public policy. Whenever I use that term, I'm talking about laws, not necessarily U.S. laws, but as they apply in different jurisdictions, different countries. And then corporate policy is really more um, the rules that a corporation levies on its employees, maybe for information systems use, information systems development, governance. It can be their policy towards their customers, and we'll talk a little bit about both of those. I've got some wrap up comments. I'm done with feedback on week two's discussion. There were some really good posts, really great posts. We'll wrap up thoughts on that, and then talk about week four's discussion topic. We're all done with our first paper, and we're rolling back into discussion. So I'll highlight those instructions, and then we'll conclude. Okay, so some definitions here, and they get defined. Privacy gets defined differently depending on the scope and the author and the context of where. But the two I found here on the Oxford English Dictionaries, the state or condition of being free from being observed or disturbed by other people. Disturbed by other people. That could be a website. If a pop-up ad disturbs you, it's violating your privacy, according to this loose definition. And the secondary definition, according to Oxford, is the state of being free from public attention, which you'll see out there in public debate and in news stories, and as our political leaders debate the issue. Um, Privacy being the state of being free from public attention when you are out in public, um, is somewhat of a concept that is in debate. Um, and then, so what I like to discuss as a kind of a counterpoint or a more subtle point to this is anonymity, non-attribution, and the internet. Um, when you're just out on the public internet, if you're careful, you can act anonymously. If you're very skilled and crafty, you can be quite anonymous. Um, Cyber criminals are particularly good at covering their tracks and making sure that none of their activity can be attributed back to them. Um, but even just normal, just chat rooms and trolls on YouTube posting comments with an anonymous Gmail that they created 10 minutes ago because Gmail accounts are free. People can go about a lot of things on the internet um, anonymously. And of course, the anonymity is the condition of being anonymous or not being named. You can't be identified as being the originator of the traffic, the person that made the comment, the person that performed the ping sweep or the denial of service attack. So there's arguments about privacy and anonymity and research into attitudes towards it and policies towards it and everyone's understanding of it and implementation of it. How much of it is on the organization, how much of it's on the individual person, and what responsibilities are being asked of government to address situations. So it's a pretty good area of discussion. We talked about it quite a bit, quite broadly, um, in over the summer. So I hope to see another round of very spirited conversation. Okay, so public policy or legislation that has been passed to address privacy rights. Uh, it's generally developed to concern to protect individual uh, people. There have been court cases that have supported um, a company's right to collect data about you, to sell data about you, to sell aggregated or metadata about you. So that's another angle of public policy because it could be argued that a court ruling is also definitely a component of public policy. Um, so these are just some of the pieces of legislation that were discussed most prominently during the last semester. Something we don't have here in in the U.S. that they've passed in the European Union is the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And if you should probably learn the basics of that. You should go out and Google it, and there are journal articles that are being written about it. Its effectiveness or lack of effectiveness, potential loopholes in it, whether or not we need one here in the United States or in whether other countries are debating whether they need something like GDPR. Um, so a good example of foreign policy that doesn't necessarily, I mean, a public policy that doesn't affect U.S. citizens yet, but it's being debated. HIPAA is definitely something that many of you are more familiar with than I am from an implementation standpoint, particularly the patient privacy aspects of HIPAA are very dramatic and widely felt. There's quite a bit of research being done on that. You'll find journal articles that discuss issues in that. Something that's relatively new, I believe it was passed last year, is the California Consumer Privacy Act. California Consumer, I think I got that word right, Protection Act, I believe it is. You know what? I'm going to stop the slideshow and I'm going to go see if I got that wrong. I think it's the California Data Privacy Law, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. No, it is Consumer Privacy. Okay, so I copied it right. All right, back to the slideshow. California Consumer Privacy Act. So that's a state level law for citizens of California, but the way the states are interconnected, it's really hard to differentiate like that. You could have a data center in another state that's feeding data into California, or data coming from multiple places and being displayed in California. So that's a really tough thing to legislate. Another act goes back to federal. If any of you work in the government sector, the public sector, um, the Privacy Act of 1974 applies to government agencies and the way they handle personally identifiable information, or PII. Um, but it kind of opens the door for the concept of you being able to request data about yourself. So it sort of set a little bit of a precedent for whether you have the right to ask an entity, "What are you storing about me?" Um, which you have the right. You have the right to request copies of all information being stored about you from by a federal agency, as long as it's identifiable to you. And then, of course, we have FERPA. That's why grading and feedback remains private between the institution and the student, and gives you the right to request uh, uh, grades and what do you call it? Your transcripts from a college. I did want to keep this internationally focused. I saw that there were some data privacy laws passed in India, Information Technology Act of 2000, and it was amended in 2008 to add some more privacy legislation. So it seems like India, being the high tech country that it is perhaps ahead of the United States in that regard. But throughout this discussion, uh, let's make sure we're talking about legislation that affects IT professionals. Not We could talk a lot about privacy and whether or not a drone can fly over and take pictures of my backyard, but that doesn't really affect us as information professionals. So whenever you're discussing this topic, keep it focused, laser focused on um, your status as an IT professional. Do that for both the public legislation, public laws, public policy, and corporate policy. So, next area where you will see much research being done and many textbooks having been written is in the area of corporate policy. And corporations develop policy to comply with legislation like Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX, or they come up with corporate governance to comply with HIPAA, or in the federal sector, we have to comply with records management legislation. There are laws that govern what is a record and how long you'll hold on to your organization's records before you either retire them, delete them, or transfer them up to the National Archives for preservation. Um, so that's corporate policy, is how you take what's going on out there in the world in the form of laws and court cases and maybe even consumer uh, concerns, and you turn that into corporate policy that affects the way we implement information systems. Um, Now, one thing you'll see, uh, one thing, and this may be something you want to discuss. Go read Google's terms of service. It seems like they call your Google account, which gives you access to a world of functionality. Your Google account gives you blogging. It gives you YouTube video sharing, like I share with my. I put my videos on both on Blackboard, on iLearn, and on YouTube, just in case there's an access problem. It gives you search and music and Google Wallet and paying services and billing services and office automation in the form of Google Sheets and Google Docs and Google Drive, and Keep Notes and Hangouts and all this different functionality. But there's about a 14-page um, terms of service document, the EULA, the EULA end user license agreement, is what you used to sign with Microsoft. One of the interesting things, it's a side topic. It's a not involved in this week's discussion, but when you sign an end user license agreement, you basically indemnify the software company. You can't sue them if their software loses you money, costs you money, does something crazy, and um, and costs your company money. The, in the end user license agreement, you basically agree to hold them harmless. So there's a lot of legal legal thought that goes into these terms of service and end user license agreements that can generally protect the company. That's the main thing. Those end user license agreement and terms of service aren't really constructed by lawyers to protect you when you're using Microsoft software or Google applications in your Google account or whatever the case may be. They're really there to protect the company, and that's an area of research in and of itself. The coverage of these terms of service agreements, and whether or not things have arisen that need to be patched in the agreement. How those terms of service will be adjusted to comply with something like Europe's GDPR. So that's a whole area in and of itself. Then there's another area of corporate policy governance. Who is allowed to make what decision? Um, who has control over what sections of information systems policy, information security policy, information systems implementation decisions? You've all dealt with corporate governance in your life as developers, and having to go to critical design reviews and making sure that the right vice presidents that are stakeholders in the project have all signed off on requirements or critical design review. They've all done a go no go check to see if training is accomplished. Say so. These are all project management governance that affects IT implementations. So there's many areas there, and then of course you have permissions. Most of you are IT workers. Some of you are super users and can see anything you want, but there's probably logs in the background. If your organization is on top of things, there are probably logs under there that even a super user can't modify to cover your tracks, because I'm sure you all know that a power user, a super user, with access to all the data in a corporation, is probably the largest single threat um, to to information security. And then there's the way systems are architected can somewhat segment, which kind of goes hand in glove with permissions a little bit, but really it's beyond permissions. It's more segmenting the architecture of an information system such that the functional areas don't necessarily have access into each other's data, and you can architect a decision support system or a collaboration system where you have different layers where the workers can't necessarily see the uh, the the sensitive discussions that corporate executives are having. So there's ways to architect the system horizontally, vertically, to protect information within a corporation. Different email policies, different shared drives, file libraries can be segmented so that you really only want employees seeing what they need to see to get their job done. Then there's the argument can be made, and it is in some companies, that the more transparency you have, the smarter your employees are, the better they'll be. So that's just a lot of factors to go into in developing a corporate policy regarding information systems. And again, bottom line here, let's stay focused on corporate policy that affects IT professionals, whether that's fair use policies or bring your own device, employee monitoring. Um, when you hit a website, generally you go through a proxy server. That proxy server usually has software on it that reports, uh, surfing activity to the corporate leadership if there's either too much surfing or questionable websites or too much time on the internet versus working in your IDE or in your database software. So yeah, so let's maintain a distinction between public policy and privacy concerns and data protection and that sort of thing, and corporate policy that sometimes implements it, sometimes protects the company from getting in trouble about it. Uh, it aids compliance sometimes in allowing reporting or more transparent. Uh, the Yeah, I won't go into it. I won't go into it this week. But again, we're focusing on IT professionals. Okay, so before I post the instructions about the week 4 discussion post or discussion board, I wanted to give some final thoughts. Some of you uh, posted some really good original content. You talked about the topic personally, how it affected you. I could tell that you were honestly discussing how the article or the chapter in the textbook might affect your dissertation in the future, even though, of course, you're far from having to choose a dissertation topic. It's never too early to think about it. And there were good posts. There were, and then when you were discussing with your teammates, I could tell some of you were really focusing on what your teammates had said, and you were talking about this. You were discussing it. You weren't just saying, I want to add a few points, and then pasting some garbage you found on the internet that had been run through a rephrasing tool. The better posts this week really did make this a personal discussion that invited discussion. Your posts to your fellow students should invite discussion. It should invite a reply. Um, when you say, I liked your post, your thought on X, Y, or Z made me remember, and then share something from your own work, your own thoughts, your own opinions. The posts that did that sort of thing were really good. The ones that weren't, and we all saw them, and I reacted to some of them. Some of you reacted. They had nothing to do with the instructions. They're not listening to the lectures. Some of you are not watching the lectures. You're not reading the instructions. You're going out, finding a journal article, sticking it in a paraphrasing website, and sticking it on the website. Some of you are helping me, and this is good. Some of you are being professional colleagues. And when you see someone posting like that, you do something about it. You say, I don't believe that you address the subject, because your classmates that are doing this, your classmates that are not putting any time or attention into the class, are wasting your time. So we all need to do our duty, and do our jobs and take some time and write originally, and address the instructions. This is just impossible to do if all you're doing is spinning articles and using these paraphrasing websites. And I went all summer, all 8 weeks of the summer term, wondering what in the world is going on here, because this makes no sense. Some of it kind of maybe almost made grammatical sense, but it was nonsense. Boulder dash, drivel, every negative word you can look up in the dictionary that refers to writing that doesn't convey meaning. That's what I was dealing with. And you've seen it in this class. Uh, just absolute nonsense. And that's what happens with these paraphrasing websites. Uh, there's just some kind of people are playing just a sick, childish game by posting reworded content. And then some of it wasn't even reworded, it was just copied from the internet, which is just so insulting, it's hard to put to words. But anyway, in your posts, yes, use professional language, but these are not research papers. No one is expecting you to sound like a PhD. There's no pressure to write at that level, which is a misnomer. I don't know why. All the good articles that you read are very easy to understand. They're very plain spoken. Um, so anyway, be professional, but be conversational. Uh, and when I see posts that say it's obvious that you are an expert in your field and someone to be respected, uh, I want to add some points, and then you see the font changes, and it's obviously that they're posting something from a reworded website. It's just a paragraph of garbage, just garbage. So please avoid that. If you were doing that and you didn't know and you got a low score in your discussion, please don't ask me to regrade it. Please don't tell me you didn't understand, because everybody understands that you don't reword stuff from the internet and post it in class discussion. So don't insult your own intellect, and don't ask me to compensate for taking a shortcut. Everybody understands what we're doing here. No one these if you think that journal articles are just random words from paraphrasing websites, and every journal article that's ever been written is just a randomly worded bit of nonsense, then you really need to email me, and perhaps we need to have a conversation with your guidance counselor, because that is not the way academic writing works, and I'm sure you all know that. So if you see this in class discussion, and it looks like somebody is posting nonsense and they're just trying to fill the square and get a grade and move on, and not take any time and not do any work, call them on it, reply to them, encourage them to do better, encourage them to put more thought into their response, encourage them to write originally, encourage them to follow the instructions, encourage them to teach you what they know from their own work experiences, and to share their own opinions in class discussion. Okay? So don't reply and then lecture as if you're an expert on the subject. You see that. I want to add some points. And then they act like they've been researching and writing about a topic, for the last 20 years. Please avoid that. Talk personally about your own experiences and your own opinions. Now, if you found an article, no kidding, you found an article that you thought was pretty informative, and you think it applies to their train of thought, then absolutely share it. But don't reword it. Don't put anything in your post from that article. Just say, hey, I noticed you were talking about GDPR and how we need one in the United States. I found this argument that basically backs up what you've said. Here's the article. Here's a link to it in Google Scholar. Um, uh, I thought you had an interesting post. Have a nice day. But don't don't spend your entire post telling them what they said. I see that a lot of that too. You're saying, nice post. You're obviously an expert in your field, and someone of great intellectual strength, and I honestly respect you wholeheartedly. Just some folks are using a lot of time just with cordialities, and then you spend two or three more sentences saying what they said and that you agree with it. No, invite discussion. Don't just tell somebody that you respect them and then repeat what they said. Say something that invites more conversation. Try and say something that they want to reply to either clarify or to thank you for a resource or something like that. This should be a discussion. This should be something like, it should sound like something over coffee in the conference room before a staff meeting. So it's professional, it's work related, but it's not. These are not research papers. Okay. Oh yeah. So that's my two cents on what went on with the week 2 discussion. If you got a bad grade, please learn from your mistake. Um, and if you did well, most of the people that posted really well, everyone replied. And there's like a community of people that are getting responses because they're putting the work in. And then there's posts that nobody replied to. Either they were late, um, or they just didn't add anything to the discussion. They were just garbage. So let's post meaningful, worthwhile things in class discussion. All right. Okay. So this discussion question, just 2 parts. And some people are trying to, are going out and finding 3 pages of stuff, running it through an article spinner and posting it. I don't want 3 pages. I want about a half a page, 500 words or so. So I want you to choose an issue within the topic of privacy policy, like we discussed during this lecture, public law or corporate policy, but make it personal to you that affects you at work, or it fits within your PhD concentration or research area of interest. And when you're talking about it, make it personal to you. Make it obvious when we are reading it why this affects you. Use the word I. I worked on a system that had a database problem with HIPAA, or I worked on corporate governance in order to control departmental level access to information, or something like that. But pick an area and try and be a little bit narrow. Just don't just pick privacy. I mean, that's too broad. So choose a subtopic, and then give us a brief overview of the issue, but focus on why it is or why it was a problem. Why? What did GDPR fix? What did HIPAA fix? Um, and in when you're making it personal, what was the problem? You know what I mean? Why was there a problem that you solved? I guess would be a good way to put this. But make sure you're focusing on your experience with the policy and how it impacted on you working with or interacting with information systems. Some of you are not currently working, but perhaps there's an issue that you're interacting with an information system. It could be maybe an identity theft issue with your bank, and it could be an authentication issue where you lost your Google account and had to go through steps to re-authenticate, and maybe that made you think about privacy policy. But whatever you do, make this personal to you. Please, no research papers posted especially from rewording websites. But even if you write it originally, be conversational, be professional, but be conversational. Okay, so my bottom line, bold topics, discuss the issues. It's not a research paper. We're supposed to be learning from each other. You go out to the library, you go out to Google Scholar, you read 3, 4, 5, 10 articles, read the abstracts, read the findings, get to where you're somewhat well versed on this. And then by Thursday night, post your response. Some of you will post tomorrow, and you haven't taken the time to research your topic. So take a couple of days here. Use section headings. In this case, it's only 2. A brief overview of the issue. I chose this issue because yada yada yada. It's a problem because and you describe why it's a problem. Use a section heading for that, and then your next section should say how this policy area impacted me working with, and then it couldn't hurt to say what information system you were working on or what kind of information system. So these section headings make your writing more understandable to the reader. And last week there were 4 sections, or last discussion question there were 4 sections. And again, I got some responses that were to the week 2 discussion that were so late no one could read them. So make sure you get your submissions in, your initial submission by Thursday night, and your replies to fellow students by Saturday night. And I look forward to another good round of discussion. No spinning, no paraphrasing tools. Okay, write originally. All right. So this week was about data and privacy and electronic information. And it's a huge world. It's a huge economy, the data economy. There are companies that make their living. I posted a, a link on one of the pages here in the speaker notes to what apparently is an internal document of how a company attributes your internet traffic to an individual person so that they can do targeted marketing. That could be something that you discuss this week: targeted marketing and data brokers. There's sky's the limit. This is a but I look forward to answers to questions like this. In the era of big data, who owns data? Uh, it might be about you. What rights do you have? Do you have the right to request that data? What rights should you have that you don't? These are all issues being addressed by researchers out there in academic writing. Is data about you your property? Not currently. Not if you read the terms of service and the end user license agreement. Your bank's account information about you is that bank's property, and it's subpoenaable, and the bank has to maintain it accurately by government, by law, particularly portions of the Patriot Act. So there's all kinds of legislation that affects us as information systems professionals. Should you have the right to know what information about you is held by the government? You have the right to request information via the Privacy Act, but that's federal. That's federal. Do you have the right to know how many times your face has been seen on a traffic camera or a public webcam, or how many times your license plate has been tracked? One of my undergraduate students told me there's a sign at the Arizona-California border basically telling you to maintain your lane position so that they could take a picture of your license plate and track your travel. So, do you have the right to request all the information? I want to know everything you know about me, Google. Should that be a right? Do you have the right to be erased or forgotten? There's been a lawsuit. I think it was in Denmark, talking about being erased. So, anyway, lots of concerns. And if this is an area of interest to you or an area of professional concentration, then you'll have a lot to share this week. I look forward to a week of original, authentic, professional discussion. No lecturing, no pontificating, just really good, honest conversation. And no paper this week, discussion board only. And I will see you in the classroom.